In August 2014, in the city of Ferguson, Missouri, 18-year-old black man Michael Brown was shot by police, bringing social justice to the forefront of American society and spurring civil unrest across the Midwest.
You must disperse immediately! Now, this is an order! Be subject to arrest and other actions!
The hashtag StayWoke trended on Twitter for the first time. That same month, an unrelated war began within the video game community labeled Gamergate, possibly the first internet culture war. Though it was originally about game journalism, it quickly encompassed feminism, diversity, and censorship in video games. For the first time, people realized the power of social media to shape a narrative and how it could be used as a weapon to bully companies, get people fired, and sway public opinion. Companies started acquiescing to whichever vocal minority complained the loudest for fear of boycott, sanitizing their products and messages to try not to offend anyone. It is not surprising that it was during this time that Wizards of the Coast fell prey to this new culture of social justice. In the midst of Gamergate, Wizards was creating a new female black planeswalker named Kaya. This is when Wizards hired their first cultural consultant. They reached out to black girl nerds who recommended Monique Jones, whom Wizards subsequently hired as a consultant for Kaya. This is where wokeness began infiltrating Magic the Gathering. Here's some criticism I've read online regarding hiring a sensitivity consultant for Kaya. It discourages the creation of black women characters or other minorities because there's extra difficulty and expense involved. It rejects the concept of equality by holding some races to a different standard than others. It treats black people like aliens that white people can't hope to comprehend. It treats black people like a monolith. And it dilutes a writer's artistic freedom and insults their writing ability, which to me implies that Wizards higher-ups don't trust their writers, and they need to cover their ass with a consultant. So if anyone finds something offensive about Kaya, they can point to the consultant. The next sign of things to come happened in 2015, when they introduced Alesha, who smiles at death. She is revealed as the first openly transgender Magic character in the short story, The Truth of Names. Many people are not aware that she wasn't created as a trans character, which is probably why Wizards made Alesha's art brief confidential, something I've never heard of them doing before. However, the truth came out in 2018 when James Wyatt, the author of the short story The Truth of Names, told them,
"As a card and as originally conceived, Alesha was not identified as trans."
Wyatt, whose son is trans, wanted the privilege of writing the story. The climax of the story was when a based orc called Alesha,
a human boy who thinks he's a woman.
It was Wyatt's son Ashley who convinced him to add that scene. So why the last minute change? I speculate it is because during the lead up to Fate Reforged, hashtag We Need Diverse Games was trending on Twitter, and trans Gamergate personality Brianna Wu was leading a crusade to get more trans representation in games. I believe, not wanting to be the next target of accusations of transphobia, Wizards hastily changed Alesha to be trans behind the scenes. Inclusion also means updating problematic characters, as we saw during the development of Magic Origins. This was when newly hired creative writer Kimberly Crines retconned the character Nissa Ravine. She was originally an elf supremacist, believing the elves are the true heirs and best stewards of the planes of the multiverse. This would have been a perfect opportunity for a redemption arc, where through character development, Nissa discovers the error of her ways, but instead, Wizards just retconned her entire backstory.
There's absolutely some making sure that she's the right character to enter into the plans we have for going forward.
Yeah,
and you can speak more to that.
Yeah, I think we want her values to reflect the way we as a company are evolving as well, and we want to set ourselves up for the best success with this character moving forward. And so the parts of her personality we chose to preserve. We carefully thought about that, and where we see her evolution going next is, we're happy with where we are with her right now, and really excited for the potential of all of these characters.
JBD from Star City Games summarized it like this.
Wizards didn't even want an overcoming prejudice storyline for Nissa. She just went from xenophobe to inoffensive elvish granola girl in a hard swerve.
He continues with,
I find the reflects our values argument a trifle odd. Apparently the Ob Nixilis plan of ending all life in a world and then brutally conquering others is just fine by the values of Wizards, not to mention Tybalt's torture tour.
The first time I noticed something was changing in the culture of Magic the Gathering was in November 2015 when Channel Fireball writer and Magic the Gathering pro Travis Wu came under fire for talking about Mein Kampf on a Twitch stream. I had barely heard of Wu before then, but excited about some drama, I made some popcorn and loaded up the stream to see what all the fuss was about.
Call me a lunatic or whatever. I'm going to start off by saying that I purchased Mein Kampf with the goal of figuring out what the fuck happened, basically. I want to know the German perspective on things.
1 hour later.
There was absolutely nothing to be offended by. It was a fair review of the book, and he condemned Hitler several times. Still, because of internet uproar by people who didn't likely watch the video or saw out of context quotes, he lost his job at Channel Fireball. 2 years later, Wu came under fire again for his role in creating the Magic for Bad Facebook group, after a post from that group went viral. He wasn't the one who created that post. Regardless, he was suspended from competitive play for 1 year. And see that lady in the middle right dressed like Liliana? That's Christine Sprankle, and she brings us to our next story. At the same time Travis Wu was suspended, Jeremy Hambley was also suspended, but for life, and was also banned from Magic Online, which he had invested hundreds of dollars into. What did he do? He called Christine Sprankle out for using her looks to get Sims to pay her money on Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, the link to mine is in the description. She eventually quit cosplaying and blamed Jeremy's harassment on her decision. Her Sims got vocal on social media and Wizards bowed down to their demands and suspended Jeremy for life. And Christine Sprankle? Well, like most MTG cosplayers, you can find her on OnlyFans now. Somewhat ironically, it wasn't long after this fiasco that head Magic designer Mark Rosewater confirmed that Magic was moving away from cheesecake art, which had been disappearing since 2014, because he believed it made a subset of players uncomfortable. To learn more about this, watch my companion video about the current art direction of Magic. By this point, Wizards of the Coast is starting to take online outrage pretty seriously, giving real-world consequences to those who publish content they disagree with. So far, only individual players had been affected by these outcries. That would change in 2019 when one of Magic's most loved and prolific artists is caught following the wrong people on Twitter. When leftist Magic players discovered that Therese Nielsen, who had been illustrated for Magic since the mid-1990s, followed and liked some tweets from what they deemed far-right hate-mongers, MTG social media spaces were flooded with calls for Wizards to stop using her art. Allegations that Nielsen was a TERF only strengthened the online campaign against her. As far as being a TERF, no evidence of this has been presented by her accusers, and I have not found any myself even after several deep dives into the controversy. The campaign against Nielsen came to a head during Mythic Championship 6 in November 2019.
Richmond, Virginia, home of the 6th Mythic Championship. Over the course of
Trans Magic player Aaron Pritchett, who won Mythic Championship 5 earlier that year, decided to write in bold black marker, "No TERFs on Girl Turf," and "Trans rights are human rights" on basic lands featuring Nielsen's art. Wizards of the Coast made him remove the cards from his deck. This prompted Autumn to go on Twitter and complain about Wizards officials making him remove the cards. The live stream for Mythic Championship 6 was soon flooded with messages of support for Autumn and disdain for Wizards' decision. In response, the stream chat was switched to sub-only mode by Wizards of the Coast. Wizard capitulated to the online pressure that followed, and allowed Autumn to write pro-trans messages on his lands on day 2 of the tournament. Though this furthered the online hate campaign against Therese Nilsson, Wizards remained mum on the subject. Perhaps that is because they were being inundated with complaints of queer erasure regarding the newly released Magic novel, War of the Spark Forsaken. Before I continue, let me explain the concept of queer coding. Queer coding is when a fictional character presents queer stereotypes, but their sexuality is never explicitly confirmed. In some cases, the author's intention was for the character to be queer, but because of societal norms of the time, they couldn't explicitly state that. However, in recent times, more often than not, the character was never intended by the author to be queer, but it is the audience who projects queerness onto them. Some examples of audience queer coding in Magic lore is Xantcha and to a lesser extent Karn. Xantcha was a sleeper agent created in a vat in Phyrexia's fourth sphere. Many people who have not read the novel Planeswalker or who have low reading comprehension claim Xantcha is trans. In an article by Card Kingdom, they state she was created without gender and decides to present as female. First, from the transgender perspective, everyone is born without gender. Second, she didn't decide to present female, she was created female. Transgender Marxist author Sam Keeper got it wrong as well in his article for Cool Stuff Inc. It said Xantcha is a vat-bred artificial human created as an undifferentiated sexless entity designed to infiltrate human society. Again, she wasn't created undifferentiated and sexless. She was created as a woman with female parts. This brings us to my boy Karn. It's not often a creator of a character retroactively queer codes them, but this is exactly what happened with Karn. Back in 2014, when gender identity became mainstream and the number of sexual orientations exploded, Karn's co-creator Mark Rosewater decided to virtue signal and claim that Karn was non-binary. He must have forgot the canon book Time Streams, in which Karn was created by Urza and Baron, both of whom refer to him as Mel. In fact, until Jorah gave him his name, he was just called the Silver Man. I get it, technically any robot or golem is asexual and non-binary. But when you take it to its extreme, does that mean Bosch, Golos, and Alabu are queer representation in Magic? Is every golem and robot in Magic queer representation? It seems Wizards has been representing non-binary individuals since Alpha with Obsiana's golem. What does this have to do with War of the Spark Forsaken? To answer this question, we have to go back in time to 2009 when the book The Purifying Fire was released, a novel focusing on Chandra Nalaar. In this book, she's introduced to Gideon, who is an antagonist at first, but she grows to have feelings for him. Up until 2016, he was portrayed as Chandra's primary love interest. It is then that Nissa and Chandra are featured in the Magic story together for the first time. It wasn't long after that certain parts of the audience began to code the Planeswalkers as being queer. They couldn't just be close friends, they had to be queer. Wizards did catch on to this coding, and some of their later interactions do seem to imply that Chandra had romantic feelings for Nissa, though they still had Chandra constantly flirting with Gideon, who she called Beef Slab or Gids. This led many to believe that Chandra was bisexual. Then it was revealed in War of the Spark Forsaken that Chandra was straight and liked strong men. The internet went crazy. How dare Wizards not provide fan service for my lesbian planeswalker fantasy? See, many people had read Chandra as queer-coded, and when Wizards stripped that away from them, they flipped out. One ex-Wizards employee who worked as a queer consultant claimed that Wizards had been planning to make Chandra a pansexual hot mess. He also shared this not-so-surprising tidbit.
We built everything from BFZ forward with the intention of representing diverse sexualities.
Prominent Magic the Gathering content creators were also attacking the novel. Here's what the professor from Tolarian Community College had to say.
In the novel, Nissa and Chandra's relationship comes to an end. This by itself is upsetting to many due to the literal years of development between the two that the Magic story has invested us in. But what is more damaging is that the relationship is ended in a way that can be described as biphobic, by describing the love and attraction between Nissa and Chandra to not only be over, but to have never existed. These are not just words describing the conclusion of a relationship between two women, but they are words commenting on the truth behind who and how they love. What is Weissman trying to convey by stressing the concept of decidedly male at all, let alone as that being the true and consistent type of person Chandra has had relationships with? These words are saying that Chandra is not attracted to women, that what happened between her and Nissa was an aberration, a flight of fancy, and that her real attraction is one that belongs not only to the male, but the decidedly male. Weissman is so intent on conveying the masculine role in Chandra's romantic life that he has her think not of lightning as an element between her and Nissa, but specifically Ral Zarek's lightning, another masculine spark of attraction. It is tantamount to erasing the existence of Chandra and Nissa as a same-sex couple. And the words used are ones that can be used to erase bisexual identity and existence.
Thank you, Professor, for those profound words of insight. In response to the complaints of queer erasure, Wizards quickly issued an apology saying they didn't live up to fans' expectations and that Chandra will love and be involved with many characters as her story unfolds, regardless of gender. Though for some reason I doubt we will see her in a heterosexual relationship, especially when fresh off the heels of War of the Spark, they have her scissoring Adeline and Innistrad. Chandra and Nissa did eventually reconnect, and I believe they're now a couple. Whatever you think about this controversy, it cannot be denied that it further pushed Wizards down the path of wokeness. In the summer of 2020, the USA was once again consumed with leftist outrage, and social justice was again pushed to the forefront of Americans' minds.
Good evening, everyone. Officials in Minneapolis hoping for calm tonight after a former police officer was charged with murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd.
The death of George Floyd in May 2020 intensified some Magic players looking for things to be offended about. They started calling for Wizards to issue a statement on Invoke Prejudice, a 25-year-old card many considered racist. Check out my video on the art of Invoke Prejudice and decide for yourself. On June 10, 2020, Wizards did issue a statement in regards to Invoke Prejudice. Wizards announced they were removing 7 cards from their database that they deemed racist or culturally insensitive, the first being Invoke Prejudice. The other 6 cards were Stone Throwing Devils, Pradis Gypsies, Jihad, Imprison, Crusade, and Cleanse. With this new focus on sensitivity, fans again began asking Wizards about their relationship with Therese Nielsen. On the 18th of June, Wizards finally broke their silence on the subject. with Doug Byers confirming they had cut ties with the artist.
Doug, I have a question specifically for you, and I've seen a couple variations of this in chat, so I'm just going to paraphrase. There are 3 cards in Jumpstart that have Therese Nielsen's art in them. Will we see any more of her art in the future?
Great question. We hear you. We haven't commissioned new art from Therese Nielsen in quite a while. The last product that will have any reprint art from her is this fall with Zendikar Rising.
Okay. Next.
The day before Doug made that statement, Wizards announced they had hired sensitivity readers for their games. James Mendez Hodes was one such person. I will have plenty to say about him later. For now, let's fast forward to December 2020. This is when Wizards created a DEI department and hired Jontel Layson Smith to direct it. Her stated mission was to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into our company culture, processes, and products. She was a person who had never played Magic or worked in the gaming industry. Even after working at Wizards for over a year, she admits her knowledge of Magic is elementary. She is the person responsible for the racist New Perspective Grant program, as well as Black is Magic and Pride Across the Universe. Reading her tweets can give us more insight into the direction she is pushing Wizards. Here's an image she created for Women's Solidarity. Funny enough, the character in the background is a man. Here she is calling for violence after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And here she is bemoaning capitalism. And this tweet really shows what a self-important, holier-than-thou person she is. Let's look at a few more tweets. And nothing says you're marginalized more than paying somebody to wax your pussy. She is currently still working at Wizards of the Coast. She is not the only one tainting Wizards of the Coast with diversity, equity, and inclusion. James Mendez Hodes is also doing his fair share of damage. He oversaw Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and ensured they didn't appropriate non-Japanese weapons and that some of the ogres were good guys.
One thing that we wanted to avoid was including Okinawan weapons, because there's a complicated history between Japan and Okinawa of imperialism and cultural appropriation. So ogres or oni in original Kamigawa were almost universally evil, vile, wicked, brutish monsters. And we wanted to give ogres in modern Kamigawa as much diversity as they have in Japanese legend, where ogres are often wicked, hellish creatures, but they're also capable of, for example, converting to Buddhism and having their horns fall off and becoming righteous demon gods.
Oh, interesting.
So we wanted to have more diversity of ogre ethics.
Right.
See, he has a deep-rooted belief that traditional fantasy creatures, like ogres and orcs, are racist caricatures of Asian people and minorities.
Drawing on the most hateful stereotypes he knew, Tolkien explicitly and purposefully crafted orcs as a detrimental depiction of Asian people specifically.
So it is no surprise that Wizards' other IP, Dungeons & Dragons, changed orcs and goblins from evil races to being as free as humans to decide who they are and what they want to do. To me, this neuters the complexity and impact of orcs and half-orcs that do end up being on the good side of the alignment chart. It used to mean the character overcame something. Not just an internal struggle, but perseverance in the face of a society that looks down on them. It's reminiscent of how they did Ashnod in the 2022 set, The Brothers' War. Neon Dynasty development had only begun wrapping up when The Brothers' War development started, with the creative vision of the newly hired Justice Geddes. As a huge fan of early Magic lore and the novel The Brothers' War, I was cautiously excited for this set. Though as spoilers began popping up, I quickly realized that Wizards was throwing established lore out the window and replacing it with their woke agenda. This was most noticeable in regards to Ashnod and the Fallaji. In the novel, the nomadic desert people, the Fallaji, were a male-dominated society, and women basically were second-class citizens who tended to the home and raised children. They did not take part in battle. Ashnod, a woman, being accepted by them and even commanding their armies was a massive feat. Her battle strategy and intellect earned her the respect of male Fallaji. This was a woman who went out there and achieved in the male-dominated culture, making fools of many men on her way up. How is that not a feminist wet dream? But Justice Geddes couldn't have that, and over half of the cards featuring the Fallaji warriors are women. Not only does that undo established lore, it totally undermines the character of Ashnod. And on top of that, they gave her a dorky haircut. For good measure, they also forced in a non-binary character that wasn't in the original novel, Myrelle. Another change to established lore in this set was they blackwashed Queen Kayla Ben Krug, which is actually pretty racist when you realize she cheated on her husband with at least 2 men and doesn't know who her son's father is. And it seems unnecessary when the 2 main planeswalkers in the set were a black man and an Asian woman. It's not like they were lacking representation. This wouldn't be the last character Justice Geddes blackwashes. But before we get to that, let's delve a little bit into Justice Geddes as a person. Justice was born in 1998 in the city of Bozeman, Montana to an upper-class family. His mother is a licensed clinical professional counselor and his father is an accredited attorney. He is the oldest of 3 children. Justice's parents, both lifelong Democrats, played a large role in shaping his political beliefs. Justice graduated Bozeman High School in 2016 and went on to attend the liberal arts school Bates College in Maine. There he majored in women and gender studies. While attending Bates, he did LGBT-themed stand-up comedy, and he was the editor of the student newspaper, The Bates Student. He often wrote editorials espousing his leftist beliefs and calling out perceived social injustices. In one editorial, he attacks the Bates Outing Club, a group that organizes nature trips for new students, as made of white privilege. He claims the orientation trip they arrange is made entirely of microaggressions. He then asserts the group's gender policies are prehistoric and transphobic because they state, 2 people of different genders can lead a trip. He writes that does not avoid transphobia just because you don't label those genders as male and female. It literally doesn't even say there are only 2 genders. It's about as inclusive statement as you can get. It just goes to show how Justice goes out of his way to find something to be offended by. He then goes on to say that the Outing Club is massively white and sickeningly privileged. Remember, he is a rich white kid himself. His solution to the made-up problem is instead of having a nature outing, have a trip focused on queer identity formation in tabletop role-playing games. In another article titled Bernie or Bust, he shares his political philosophy, which is, follow the lead of women of color. That is as deep as it gets. He goes on to talk about his fear under the Trump administration, saying that Trump only emboldens gun violence and that he feels threatened by police, strangers, and peers, any of whom could pull a gun on him. Then he deplores Bernie Sanders' policy plans for not doing more for queer equity or gun control, all while propping up leftist women of color like Maxine Waters and Stacey Abrams. While at Bates, he was named Community Liaison for the Discordians, an alcohol-free gaming club. He also expanded his interest in game and narrative design and world building at Bates. And honestly, he is a talented narrative designer and creates interesting worlds, but much of that talent is spoiled when he forces his identity politics into his designs. He graduated Bates on May 31st, 2020. After college, he moved back to Montana where he served as the media director for the Montana Democratic Party. Then in December 2020, he was given a 1-year contract with Wizards of the Coast to work as a narrative designer. He worked on 4 sets as a visual designer where he advised on lore and narrative and wrote art briefs. The set he perhaps had the biggest impact on was Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. He didn't hide the fact that his goal for this set was to insert as many queer characters as possible. Let's take a minute to look at some of his tweets regarding this set. Furthermore, he didn't want to create any dwarves that were greedy or enjoyed opulence, because that would be anti-Semitic. Honestly, if you see a fictional race that enjoys wealth and you immediately think of Jewish people, you're the one who's anti-Semitic. While the gayness of Baldur's Gate didn't provoke much protest, the Nyx set Justice worked on would change that. When Wizards announced they were making a Lord of the Rings set, many fans were excited, and then the spoilers started. Aragorn, black. Éowyn, black. Glorfindel, black. Galadriel, black. Theoden, black. Gandalf, black? Asian? Native American? I'm not sure. At Getty's direction, these characters were race swapped, causing an uproar among fans. Many saw this as pandering or done just to raise Hasbro's ESG score. Wizards says it was because they want a more diverse audience to be represented. They do not believe a person can relate to a character unless they share his skin color. While researching this video, I came across this comment on YouTube, which eloquently describes the error in that way of thinking.
As a self-respecting black guy, I've got no interest in sloppy seconds. I didn't need this nonsense to see myself in Lord of the Rings. I saw myself every time Frodo felt the weight of his task and his friend had to carry him through. I saw myself every time Pippin screwed up and it put his friends in danger. I saw myself every time fear gripped these characters, but the inspiring voice of their leader filled them with courage again. I saw myself in Boromir when he gave in to temptation, but ultimately redeemed himself to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. I was always represented in Lord of the Rings, just in ways that mattered far more than the color of my skin.
Before you pull out the pitchforks and attack Geddes, remember it was Wizards who approved all of his designs, and Wizards who hired him, likely only because he was a gay man. They knew his politics and goals when they hired him, so blame the CEO Chris Cox, who was then Wizards president, or Bill Rose, or even Aaron Forsythe. Geddes was just a kid fresh out of liberal arts college. Like many of us at that age, he wanted to make a change in the world, to right what he saw as injustices. Wizards hired him and embraced his naivety and accepted his narrative design, whether out of fear that any pushback would be seen as queerphobic, or because they knew it would raise their ESG score. In 2022, Wizards of the Coast employees participated in the Seattle Pride Parade. The company that thinks showing cleavage on cards makes people uncomfortable is okay marching in a parade behind this. Poor little girl, how is that not considered grooming? What I have come to realize is Wizards is okay providing its audience with fan service as long as it isn't for heterosexual men. It's okay, and you're even catered to if you find sexy women uncomfortable. But if you find naked gay men cuddling in a hot spring uncomfortable, you are the problem. And your uncomfortableness must stem from homophobia. Personally, I don't care if they have cards with half-naked men or half-naked women. I don't even care if someone plays with the hentai playmat. I don't buy into the argument that Magic is a children's game. It was made for adults, and adults are its largest player base. I just dislike the double standards, and quite frankly the strong left-wing bias in their practices. DEI Director Jontel Layson Smith, who I talked about earlier in this video, wrote this in a letter to the company in June 2021.
While representation is incredibly important, it means nothing if cognitively diverse voices, perspectives, and experiences are not valued and incorporated into everything we do as a company.
Unless those voices and perspectives lean right of center. Wizards of the Coast have stopped working with at least 2 of their most original and best artists over their libertarian or right-leaning political opinions. I've already talked about Therese Nielsen, but they also stopped working with another fan-favorite artist, Seb McKinnon. I couldn't find a good place to fit him in the video, so I'm just going to talk about him a little bit now. So what did McKinnon do? Well, he attended a rally protesting against vaccine mandates and forced lockdowns at the height of the COVID-19 hysteria. Many leftist commentators will say that is because there were Nazis at the protest that he got canceled. In reality, 1 or 2 bad actors with a Nazi flag showed up at the rally, and they were quickly forced to leave. But not before the media snapped a picture of the flag with the swastika on it, which people then used to try and undermine the protest as a whole. And it worked. In a rally that lasted weeks, 1 person showed up with a Nazi flag for a few minutes out of hundreds of hours, and the media ran with it. Wizards has not since commissioned Seb McKinnon for art. How many other people has Wizards cut ties with because they don't like their political beliefs? Or a better question, how many people have Wizards hired because of their political beliefs? Because they were a minority or trans or weren't a straight white man? How many talented artists and writers have not been hired by Wizards because of their skin color? When a company puts identity politics above talent, it's the consumers who suffer. Players have noticed a drop in the quality of Magic's story since before War of the Spark. The female protagonists are often Mary Sues with no flaws. Every story has a forced non-binary character with they-them pronouns that make reading it confusing. Even non-free Magic types have been complaining about the poor writing in Magic's story, citing poor character development and dumb out-of-character choices made out of convenience for a plot that is already thinner than Skin Elite Extra Lube ultra-thin lubricated latex-free condoms, ultra-silky lubrication for maximum comfort. On top of that, the art has become digital and homogenized, often devoid of beauty and originality. It often feels flat and lacking texture. Some pieces just look like bad CGI. Is it possible that the decline in artistic quality in lore and art is directly related to the rise of DEI within the company? Do characters lack depth and creativity because the author is taking too much input from a sensitivity consultant or their trans son? Were the writers themselves diversity hires? Is Magic Arena buggy because of the focus to hire marginalized folks instead of better suited white programmers? How many problems does Wizards have that ultimately comes from hiring based on identity rather than talent? Did you know over half of the company is female? And a hobby whose biggest consumer is men? Don't get me wrong, I know plenty of women who game, and I'm sure many of the ladies that work at Wizards are great at their job. But in an industry that by its nature attracts more men than women, I feel like there's got to be some discriminatory hiring practices going on there. Are things starting to change? In December 2023, a round of layoffs hit Wizards. Looking through the LinkedIn profiles of those who got let go, there is a pattern. Most of them are blue-haired pronoun profiles. And to my surprise, it was revealed as I finished up this video that DEI Director Jontel Layson Smith no longer works at Wizards. Her LinkedIn profile was updated on January 24th, but I wonder if she was not part of those same layoffs. Is Chris Cox realizing the truth in the modern day adage, go woke, go broke, and now trying to course correct? I can only hope that is the case. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and please, if you made it this far, like and subscribe, and think about supporting me financially through the links in the description.